And then there was one album left. Matt, run the numbers and then just go right into it.
Oh, then it's me. Okay, so this is Robert Wyatt with Rock Bottom from 1974. Comes in on Best Ever Albums list at number 103 in the 1970s, number 5 in 1974, number 414 of all time. It is his highest ranked album on Best Ever Albums. And it did not make Rolling Stone's list. And I think, John, you said we covered this maybe because at one time it made the top 100 in Best Ever Albums?
It was at 100 at one point. Yes, okay. Right at the time when we were initially making the list, it was going back and forth, yeah.
Okay. So full disclosure, I have no idea who Robert Wyatt is. This was, I looked at that, I was like, so I had no idea what to expect here. And
spoiler alert, he has a really interesting life too that I won't get into, but yeah.
Okay. So well, I'm wondering if this has something to do with Brian Eno, because this is another one of these electronic albums from the 70s that seems way ahead of its time. And it just I wrote down several adjectives to try to describe the music or trying to what was going on here, and I'm like avant pop. Avant electronic, if that's such a thing. Avant is certainly a word that's going to be preceding some other ones here. I heard.
Can I give you one interesting frame of reference, Matt, that might be interesting for you? Do you know who this album was produced by?
Was
Pink
it Brian
Floyd
Eno?
Drummer Nick Mason.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I wouldn't have guessed that. Wow. Okay. Yeah.
So there you go. I figured I'll throw that
in
there. Yeah.
I did psychedelic psychedelic music. It was one of my descriptors here because there's definitely some aspect of that, a raga or droning sound as well. So there's looping stuff going on here, so I can tell there's a lot of stuff happening in the studio. I'm hearing free jazz in a couple of places, just like there's these horns going off. So there's another one of these albums that we're covering in these cold listens that just has a lot of stuff going on, and it's hard to really come up with something. I think I liked it. It was certainly interesting and different and unique, and for the what I say, it was 1974. I mean. It definitely seems ahead of its time. And actually, I do have a Pink Floyd note on here. I thought that was it the fourth track, Alaphib? Seemed Alaphib. Sound like a little bit like of Piper at the Gates of Dawn era Pink Floyd kind of stuff going on there at the beginning. I had that note on. So yeah, it was. It's a lot of keys, piano driven synth stuff. Some high-pitched vocals that were interesting. I heard some, there's like keyboard whistles. There's sounds. I'm just trying to figure out where is this coming from? What instrument is making this? There was something that sounded like an accordion on the last track, Little Red Robin Hood Hit the Road. But I'm listening to it going, I think these are actually strings trying to mimic an accordion. So it just, anyway. I liked it. I don't know if I can even just say much more. I think I need to listen to this more. I couldn't tell sometimes. I think Alfie was a little bit of an eerie song, and there was some speaking going on. But again, I'm like, is this English? I can't really tell what they're saying or what's going on. So there's a lot of confusion. But there was still enough in this that was going on that made me interested in it, that I thought was that sounded good, that was palatable at least. It piqued my curiosity. I'm interested in who this guy is and what his history is and all the stuff. I didn't really do any research at all even after listening. So, I think I like it, but I can't really give you more than that. It's interesting enough to make you go, okay, this is worth going back to give it some more listens. So, yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to give this album a rock bottom because I did not like it at all. And it's clearly like krautrock, noise rock inspired. Yep. I think he's
I didn't
British.
think of that, but I think you're right. Yeah.
I think he's British because I picked up his British accent at the very beginning. It's kind of like a mixture. I mean, it's art rock too in a way, that generic umbrella term, but it's a little proggy. There's synth in it. There's piano. His high-pitched voice did nothing for me. I really kind of didn't like his singing. Sometimes he sings just the sounds instead of actual lyrics, if that makes sense. And it's jazzy too. So he's trying to do all of these things at once. And this album, you can't even really, it's hard to really describe a consistent sound throughout, because he's constantly changing it up. And I would describe it also as kind of haunting and ethereal at times. It's definitely discordant, and not in the way that Can was, that I liked, and just kind of everything I don't like about this type of sound in this genre of music. It's like if there's a line, it's kind of on the other side of the line of doing the things that they do in this type of area of music. And honestly, it's already like left my head. I can't pick something out or remember what songs sounded like, just because there's so much going on after, again, only one listen. But yeah, it was not enjoyable. It was my least favorite album of all of these that we listened to.
This is one of the hardest albums for me to categorize, because I don't even know what this is an impossible album to listen to once and totally. This album haunted me this week. It stayed. Parts of it stuck with me in my subconscious a little bit. I had it on headphones, right? And I listened to it deep in the evening. Mm-hmm. And as I listened to it initially, I had some reflections that kind of are some basic ones that I'll go into that you guys didn't touch on. Number one, he sings in a very British accent that is like kind of like the Kinks a little bit, or as definitively as British as some of those Brit pop bands later, where like a British person is singing, big vowels, big British accent, not the formal British accent either, like more like, if you know that, the kind of that like real, like, like sounding stuff. And I don't want to do, but so as a result, it's one of the few albums we've heard that has that level of Britishness to it, right? So that stands out. This dabbles in my other thing was it dabbles in a lot of things that I know you guys said it sounds ahead of its time. I don't know if this sounds ahead of its time, because it sounds like a lot of the things that were in this time. Like that's when I later found out that Nick Mason produced this. It made sense, because it does sound like the early Pink Floyd albums. Yep. Is the first thing I thought about. It's got the space of the ambient music, like Brian Eno, right? Like there's a ton of space in this album that's just existing, with at times uncomfortable stuff coming and butting against it, and at times stuff that you're kind of like, is there something going on here? Because it's like it's just open space, right? And that is a little bit like the krautrock at times too. I didn't hear it as much like the krautrock. To me, it was a lot more like the prog type sounding, just a more instead of overplaying stuff. Like some of the prog rock artists had that habit of stuffing everything they could into a track, right? Like it's like, what if you take the progressive mindset, but it's like kind of like what Wire did with punk, right? Like, what if we took this sparse music and made it sparser, right? I think like Robert Wyatt's was, what if we took this prog rock and infused it with ambient music? And it's like, and that's what at first my take was, I said, this is like kind of what happens if you take prog rock and said, how can we every once in a while short circuit the ideas with space, and kind of do that, which is anytime you're dealing with lots of space in an album, it's a tougher sell for me, because it's not my comfort zone. I like stuff that catches my attention, and space can sometimes make me uncomfortable with the album. But I couldn't get past the fact that like parts of this album just kept like coming back into my brain, and like going back to Sea Song, it's a very interesting chorus. I actually put it in the montage. It sounds like it's going to be this melodic chorus, and then it doesn't commit to being melodic at the end, which sort of describes everything, right? Like, here's this chorus, and you're like, okay, now he's going to frame it with this surprisingly melodic chorus, and then it just doesn't go there. It just stops, and he yanks it away, kind of like, nope, not going to give you that. I'm going to trail off instead and give you more space. And so, as a result, this is a definite in the middle review for me, because I can't say I hate this album like, Josh didn't like it. I definitely didn't dislike it. Yeah. I can't say I love this album either, because I'm still trying to figure... it's not something I'm going to go back and listen to all the time. It's not like mood music for me in the way that certain things that are a little bit more challenging are. But it was very interesting. And once again, like this whole week, it was like Fela Kuti sounds like he makes interest. Let me find out more about this guy. What's going on with Neil Young? I constantly found myself being interested in like who we were covering this week, right? And with this one, I was like, okay, so what's this guy's deal? You know what I mean? Like, where's he coming from? Because everybody else who's like, I was familiar with krautrock, right? I was familiar with Brian Eno and Brian Ferry and all of these people doing the music, but like Robert Wyatt, like I don't know this name as well. Like I don't even have like, for all I knew, I was going to be listening to like, you know, mainstream pop music with this, which this certainly wasn't. And the story of this is that Robert Wyatt was in this band called Soft Machine, and he broke off from it, and he was the drummer of the band. And so I guess he'd been living a little bit wild and stuff, and he was engaged to be married, and he was at a party, and he fell out of a window and was paralyzed from the waist down at about the midway point of the album. So the beginning of the album was done before the accident, and the second half was done after the accident. Oh, wow. And interestingly enough, he said that, of course, while something like that affected how the album was made, the album is not like a result of like, you know, like reflection kind of on the accident, right? Like he said it's more of like his direct quote was that he said that the material was not a direct result of the accident and the recuperation. It's more just the music sort of like was about lots of themes in his life, of which that was one, which seems incredibly hard to believe. Like how this sounds, and also called rock bottom, right, and stuff. But I mean, I got to take the artist's word for it, right? But that's the context of this. Yeah, he was making this album, and it also left him not being able to play the drums. So here's a drummer, and he's reinventing himself, right? You know, as a solo artist. So that was interesting. I thought, like in terms of a thing. Like a narrative that could be different stuff. But yeah, the other thing that became really fascinating about this is I guess right after this album, like he was like a cult figure, and I guess he just decided to cover I'm a Believer by the Monkees, and like it became this like massive novelty hit in Great Britain that went almost to the top of the charts. And it's really like his one single, and it's a cover of I'm a Believer by the Monkees, which like I had to check out, right? Because I'm like, what would that sound like filtered? Yeah. It like it's kind of and not at all at the same time, if that makes sense. I'll try to find it. And
is it better than the Smash Mouth version?
He did perform it on Top of the Pops to keep a narrative right here, which I also thought was interesting. I think that's what I'm going to post. No, it does not share similarities with like kind of the Smash Mouth interpretation. You know what I mean? It's like it's its own thing. And at first I thought, is it going to be like William Shatner singing stuff? Not like, you got what I'm saying, where it's clearly derived to be. No, it's not really that. It's like its own thing. Matt, I'm shocked you did not mention Radiohead, because there's definite callbacks to Radiohead on this.
Yes.
I don't know if they were influenced, but like Sea Song, like in some of these songs, like that.
No, you're right.
The fifth song, I mean, that like there are direct Radiohead tracks that I'm like, oh god, this is in the same lane as that.
Isn't there some backwards vocals in this too, like on A Life or Ali Ife or whatever?
I can't say for sure, but it wouldn't surprise me if that was the case. Yeah, it's like on Alfie and stuff. There's stuff that easily could have been Radiohead stuff. So
no, you're right. I don't have an excuse for that. I don't know why I didn't think of that. You're absolutely right.
And I know that we tend to drop certain bands too much, so I tried to stay away from it. But like we've referenced Radiohead a couple different times. To me, no album sounded more like Radiohead than this album. This was almost like not just cousins. This was like twin brothers at times to some of the stuff Radiohead's doing at certain points. So I don't know if they were influenced by this album. I find it almost impossible to believe that they hadn't heard this album before they made some of those albums. So I'll check that out. But even at the end, as I was getting on before here and just looking at stuff and not wanting to buy myself, it's funny because there's usually a description of like what Robert Christgau thinks of an album. He's usually got these really like very like pointed takes, right? Like one way or the other. Even he's kind of like baffled by this album as he's listening to it. It was like, he's like, I'm not quite sure what to think about this album. And I was laughing. I'm like, I think that's the first time I've ever seen him not take a hard take on something. So yes, but Matt, he described it also as a combination of drones and songs.
Yep.
Which I think is a good description of this album. So, yep.
Yeah,
so, yeah,
and I just found an article. I just like Googled Robert Wyatt and Tom York for Radiohead. And Radiohead's an article after In Rainbows came out, and it said that Radiohead singer has been taking tips from Robert Wyatt. So,
that's what this sounded like In Rainbows. That's what I was referencing. Yes. Yeah. So
no, you're
I'm
right.
glad that. I mean, it's. I'd like to credit myself with genius, but that's not a real big leap right there.
No, it didn't pop up. Another fun fact that I've seen in here. So that band that he was in, Soft Machine, they're still around. Did you know who was one of their first members? Not very long. Andy Summers.
From the Police?
From the Police, was a guitarist in 1968.
Well, I know Andy Summers is like 10 years older than the other two guys in the band, so that makes sense because like he could be in that genre, yeah. Because at first you think the Police, that doesn't overlap with the late, but then I remember Andy Summers is like 10 years older.
Yes.
So yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Very
but
interesting.
apparently they're still around. Apparently.
I thought, Matt, when you said you Google it, it was going to be like Robert Wyatt's Tom York's godfather or something.
Yeah.
He named his first child like Robert.
Yeah.
Wyatt after him. Yeah. So,
but you're right. That's a good pickup there for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, man.
No, I like stuff like this. It's just when you listen to it the first time, that's why it's like impossible. Do I really like this? Is this just weird? Is this like this? Is this going to be a grower? You know, it's hard to.
Yeah.
But
like I said, net neutral for me, I think, because I just would need to listen to this more and just figure out what my take is. But I am always glad we visit albums like this, because I do feel it begins to create tapestry for like the stuff we cover, and you're like, ooh, okay, now. I won't get into Big Star right now because we're going to cover them later. But, it's kind of one of these things that you can see where stuff comes from, even if they didn't know at the time where it's coming from. And I feel that's one of the cool things about these takes is that you can see stuff and go, okay, like even if other people don't know it, like the people that we like or were intriguing to us, right? We're listening to this stuff. And I always like to hear where stuff came from. So,
yeah.
Yep.
No, so. Yeah, that makes sense. And I can hear that in this album from what I remember, but it just doesn't appeal to me.
I got
so here's it's amazing.
Matt's doing a deep dive right now.
I just this is an article in Spin. Tom York's 20 biggest influences on this list: Robert Wyatt, Fela Kuti, and Neil Young.
Wow. How about that? Well, he's good. Well, Tom York, if you're listening, we made the episode for you. So, yeah. All you got to do is throw like Kraftwerk on and a couple other things, and I think we'll be set. So
that's amazing.
That's
wow. Not on and Krautrock.
Yeah, well, like I said, I went to them for a reason, Matt, like why it's there. I mean,
This is like Tom York bingo.
It's like Brian Eno's cards, but for like Tom York's brain. So, yeah. So, all right. Well, what better way to stop them? What was it? The oblique strategies, right?
Yeah,
was the
there
name
you go.
of it. Yeah. Which, if I ever formed a band, by the way, it's you can't really go with it because it's too on the nose. But you could do a lot worse for a band name than Oblique Strategies. Yeah. So I'm gonna find maybe a fantasy football team one year will be Oblique Strategies.
That's a good one.
Yeah. So, well, with that being said, I think that puts a bow on this